We will call this meeting to order. We're live on Zoom. The meeting today has been properly posted with the county clerk's office on the appropriate media. Please stand. We'll have a moment of silence and the pledge of allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. While I get on my stool to climb up in his chair, if I had it where Jeff has it, he wouldn't be able to see me. Roll call for the evening tonight. Chairman Schleif is excused and Supervisor Mclaughlin is participating via Zoom. Otherwise, we are all here. First item of business on the agenda will be the consent agenda. And I really do hope that all the supervisors read through the information in these reports, as these cover activities that directly impact and affect the citizens of the county. It may be 4-H, conservation programs, baseball park district, programs for older citizens, caregivers. These are all programs where the county is most visible to our residents. So if you don't typically read through those, please do. There's a lot of information in there and just general background. With that, I'll entertain a motion and a second to accept the consent agenda as presented. Mr. Shadwin, motion. Ms. Schulteis, Supervisor Schulteis for the second. Motion and second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Now we're going to move on to appearances and letters. Before we get into this, I believe our county executive has a special introduction tonight. Mr. Shulman, sir.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to take an opportunity today to introduce our new director of communications, Fran Mclaughlin. Fran's been with us for the last couple of weeks. That beautiful newsletter that hopefully you all just received in your mailbox. We didn't allow her to sleep for about 72 hours straight, so that would get done. But we're happy to have her. Would you like to say a few words of introduction?
Oh, sure. Just I'm happy to be here. And if you may not know, but I do have pretty extensive background with county government, only coming from Milwaukee. I did serve about 7 or 8 years under Scott Walker when he was county executive. And then I was public information officer for the sheriff's office under Sheriff Clark for another 8 years.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Welcome.
Thank you and welcome. I'm going to start out with item A, an update on the American Rescue Plan Act. I understand Margie's going to make that presentation. And are you also going to explain the papers that were put on our desk? All right, very good. It's all yours.
He's not working. No. Okay. I have kids. I talk loud.
Now use your outdoor voice.
Well, it's probably my indoor voice if you ask my family or my coworkers. So there are 2 items that were provided for this presentation item. One is kind of a PDF file of a spreadsheet, which is modified what we use to internally to kind of track our Arpa dollars. And the second was more of just kind of a memo to provide a little bit of background. I know we've got some newer supervisors. They may not kind of know where this money came from, what it's all about. So American Rescue Plan was passed in March of 21 by the United States federal level. Part of that established a coronavirus state and local fiscal recovery fund, of which funds were then allocated out to several levels of local governments, counties being one of them. The amounts were based on population data and some other statistics from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And based on all of that, the county, Washington County, got just over $26.4 million. That came in 2 separate payments. We received our first half in June of 21 and our second half in June of 22. So all the funds, and this is unusual for some federal grants, the funds were basically upfronted to us. A lot of times our grants are on a reimbursement basis, meaning we spend the money, we tell the government what we spend it on, how much we spent, then they give us the check back to reimburse us. These funds kind of flipped that on us. We got all the money up front, and then we got the guidance after we got the first half of money And even after we got the second half of money, we continue to get updated guidance. So things were, in the beginning, shifting a lot constantly. So they've settled down a little bit now. The county is required to report on a quarterly basis what we've been using the funds for. And those reports go directly to the U.S. Treasury Department, and they get filed by me. And the Treasury has changed the report on us now. This will be our third report coming up. It's changed 3 times. And every time they change it, they ask for a little bit more information. So a lot of the data that we kind of gather and that we're using to track this is all based on how I need to report it back to the federal government and categorize it in what they call expenditure codes or categories. So we refer to them as EC numbers because everybody in government likes shorthand acronyms. So on your landscape report, on the far left side, you'll see like 1.7, 2.35. That's just helping me tie it back to what the Treasury is asking us to categorize these into the buckets. So they probably won't mean much to you, but they're make it easy for me to kind of track and report on this. So that's kind of the high level of how we got to where we are. The landscape report basically kind of provides you with a summary of what's been approved to date and what's planning on coming to you through the committees as a report. So a lot of these you would have probably already seen. There's nothing that's kind of earth-shattering or unusual. Right now, we've basically committed about just under 60% of our total allocation. So we still have about 35% left to kind of determine what we're going to do with that. Per the federal guidelines, everything has to be committed, which basically means under some kind of a legal obligation to be by the end of 24. And then they give us through the end of 26 to actually get the dollars out the door. So in relation to all of that, there's all kinds of different parameters on top as to tracking who the funds go to, meaning I need to get like W-9, so I have their tax ID numbers. I have to tell the government if they're a nonprofit or a private entity. So there's a lot of information that kind of gets filtered through us to the federal government for them to track, so they can do their reporting back to the public and the taxpayers as to what this money ultimately went towards. So on our end, a lot of it so far, biggest spend, actual spend out the door to date has been the Samaritan premiums. That's the premiums for the staff in our nursing home. We did some retention incentives essentially. And then aid to tourism. We did a couple of grants out to some of our, sorry. We did some grants out to a couple of our local tourist types of entities in the county, the Visitors Bureau, the History Center, the fairgrounds. So those were the 2 biggest categories that we've currently spent. Oh, and I'm sorry, I forgot the furlough refund. When coronavirus first hit in 20, we implemented a furlough policy to institute some savings initiatives here at the county, anticipating that we were going to see some revenue shortfalls. Sales tax and other revenues didn't fall as quickly as we'd anticipated, and in some cases, sales tax grew. So we were able to, once this ARPA dollars came into our possession, one of the allowable uses was to basically kind of refund employees who were negatively impacted on an economic basis by the pandemic. So for us, we were able to refund those furloughs. And every dollar that was lost from the employees is exactly the dollar we replaced. So those were our biggest spends. And then you can see we've got columns for what we're estimating for the rest of the year and what we've got planned for the 2 years after that. So that's kind of a high level, quick overview. If there's questions, I can try and help answer those. If I don't know the answer, I will definitely look it up and get back to you. I've got a 5-inch binder just full of ARPA documentation, so plenty of reading material.
You get off easy, Margie.
All right. Well, I don't know about easy, but thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, did they have?
Yeah, that's right. Margie,
Margie, I'm sorry, you had a
mentioned-
question. I didn't see.
yeah, there's 35% approximately remaining. Is there an understanding of what those are being earmarked for, which kind of tangentially related to an agenda item today? So I don't know if you want to cover that in a later agenda item, But just curious, that remaining $9 million, is that being earmarked?
It's not been earmarked yet. So it's still an open bucket of money that the county has some decision-making available. The later agenda item that we have is listed on here under the 22 estimates. It probably won't actually be spent in 22, but that's just where it's been sitting on my spreadsheet. So that's the $7.5 million second line from the bottom.
Thank you.
I can speak to that more when we get to that agenda item.
Did I miss anybody else's hand that was up? Okay,
All right.
now you can sit on, Margaret. Next, we're gonna hear from Aaron Dahl with his quarterly report. And a reminder, I've been told to keep it to 15 minutes or less here.
Okay,
You can use your outdoor voice, please.
So this actually precludes the quarterly reports that you'll see at the committee level next week. This is a presentation just about the county's efforts around what we're calling EOS. It stands for Entrepreneurial Operating System. And so as a result of those efforts, you'll be seeing quarterly reports again, beginning next week. But I did want to start by giving a presentation. We've got to introduce concepts. I hope it's not too painful, but we've got to introduce theory and concepts so you have a baseline for what you're going to see next week. So just to get started by way of an agenda, I do recognize that this might be hard to see at times, and so I'll try to reference just blobs and shapes over here, but I can share this presentation with the clerk's office so you can see it later. But so just by way of an agenda, we wanted to talk about traction, terms like EOS, traction. When we went to implement this, we want to talk about what we did, why we did it, and then most importantly, again, I wanted to prep you for committees starting next week. You'll start to receive regular quarterly reports from departments and from different groups. So I wanted to give you some context and again, some key terms, but then also to sort of describe the committee's role in this process, just overall. So just to set the table, I wanted to check and see if anyone has heard or read a book called Traction by Gino Wickman. Okay, you have, fantastic. Any other works by Gino Wickman? I think he's got a couple others. But generally, we've been reading this book as a leadership team for almost 2 years now, right? And so it's pretty exciting to kind of think about the potential for traction and for its application and use at the county. So just to start off with, the book introduces the concept of an entrepreneurial operating system, or an EOS, right? The key components in traction are listed on the screen, kind of hard to read. That's where we talk about vision, people, data, issues, process, and traction. I won't cover every single one. But I think it's important just to sort of note that the benefits of traction can really be described as in 3 words. The author describes them in 3 words, really. And so vision is really getting everyone on the same page about the what, about the where and the how. So this really resonated with us as county government, when we start to think about the diverse sets of functions and mandates that we carry out on a daily basis. We're like a bunch of different businesses essentially under one umbrella, right? So more diverse than Amazon, really. But generally speaking, the vision component is about getting everybody on the same page. Traction is knowing who does what and staying disciplined about our organizational purpose and providing accountability, right? So that means the leadership team can count on one another to fulfill their respective roles. We've got transparency, we've got accountability, we've got vulnerability. The next piece is the healthy component. So again, fostering that when we talk about healthy, we're really talking about culture now at this point, right? So fostering that culture of transparency, accountability, and vulnerability that helps, our leaders develop and become a more cohesive and functional team, and that trickles down throughout the entire organization. So traction, it's pretty popular in the business community nationwide. Since I started working on this project, I've been told about actually a surprising number of businesses within Washington County that are actually using traction. Given some of the successes they've had with the program, they're happy to hear and interested to hear what the county was doing in this regard as well. So a lot of the traction concepts in the book translate directly to any organization, right? Communicating a vision, setting goals, fostering, a healthy culture. Again, all signs of a healthy organization. However, the book was written from the lens of a business, right? So there's some exercises in there, some tools in there. They don't always apply well to government, right? So terms and metrics that are used are like profit or growth. Some of that stuff, government's not focused on profit or growth, generally speaking. So we knew we would have to adapt some things from the book to apply to a government organization. So we took traction and we knew we needed to adapt it to a system that fit the county. Our first step was to bring in someone with the experience and the credibility just to do this in general. So starting at the tail end of last year, we partnered with the EDWC to assist us with this. They've got significant experience implementing traction concepts. They typically refer to it as Horizon, but they've implemented these entrepreneurial operating system concepts across the county in private business, nonprofit. They've even done some work here with the county that precludes our county-wide EOS efforts. So the EDWC, they actually even use it within their own organization. So they brought a lot of good ideas, a lot of credibility to these efforts. So working with the EDWC and specifically Dan Anhalt, it's been a real pleasure. Dan couldn't make it today, but I wanted to take the time to thank him for his hard work and really his mentorship throughout this process. It's been really valuable. So the next thing we had to do, as I mentioned earlier, we had to take some of this tool set and basically crosswalk the business speak into government speak, right? So instead of focusing on things like profit, revenue growth, marketing, our EOS program is going to focus on things like goal achievement, level of service, and things like that. And then last, we had to just choose where to start, right? So those of you that have read traction or are aware of the components, there's a lot in there. And so it takes a long time just to implement it in one business. So as I mentioned before, the county's got multiple diverse business units. And so it would take a ton of time to implement the full suite of traction tools one by one throughout the entire organization. So we had to choose which core components that we wanted to focus on and sort of work from there. We knew we already had a strong strategic planning baseline. We've got a mission, vision, values already established that we've been working from. We've already identified our strategic priorities. And so that's a big piece of the overall development process of EOS. And so having that background in place was already a big time savings for us. And we were able to convert our efforts and utilize some of that good work that's already been done. I'll refer back to that in a moment, but that was our starting point. We also knew we wanted to incorporate regular reporting to committees and interested stakeholders as a component of all this. So we wanted to make sure we built that into our initial efforts as well. But rather than focus on some of those daily operational metrics, we made our initial efforts initiative focused. So we're focusing on new and improving things within the operations. Oftentimes in government and maybe everywhere else, but reporting on operational metrics sometimes becomes just a regurgitation of the number of widgets you produced. It's certainly important to understand those trends, but in terms of how meaningful a quarterly report on the number of licenses or permits issued or a caseload, things like that, again, those trends are important to be mindful of, but just a regurgitation of those numbers, not always that useful. So we decided to focus our efforts on those initiatives again. So those new things, those improvements to existing programs and processes. So after we had the initial tools and concepts in place, we had to get started training and working with the departments. So we trained 6 groups from February through June. We started with the non-elected groups and departments, and we most recently completed our work with the departments that have elected department heads. So we had 8 hours of training and work sessions for each of those groups. We tried to limit the amount of homework that they had, but naturally there was some cleanup and stuff at the end. It was a huge effort, so wanted to take the time to thank the departments, the leadership, and everyone else for their participation, their open-mindedness through this. And I also wanted to thank our internal EOS team. When I say that, I mean there was a group of us that were focused on these implementation efforts. So in addition to Dan from the EDWC, our internal team was comprised of Policy Director Matt Ferno, Management Analyst Marty Halverson, and GIS Director Eric Damcott. They played valuable roles in developing this process and helping to facilitate and manage some of our larger groups. And so I wanted to thank them as well as part of this. So very quickly, at the sessions themselves, we focused on implementing a set of tools. You're going to focus on the end product, so I don't want to spend a ton of time here, but I just wanted to touch on some of the tools we did at some of the sessions. We built out what is called a Racy and accountability charts. So RACI stands for Responsible, Accountable, Consult, and Inform. All that does is really sets clear lines of accountability for your different functions and really to create a framework for how we operate and communicate within that structure. Next, we identified a strategic platform, which is essentially just a methodology, strategic plan, just a way for a platform for you to plan around, basically, so you can assess and deploy strategies, different things like that. We helped to facilitate departments building out those initiatives, identifying and building out their initiatives, and to put them into the format that we're going to use, the presentation. And then last, we built a communication tool and a way to communicate the vision and the initiatives and everything else back out to committees and to stakeholders in a way that hopefully is easily understood and fairly quickly understood as well. So it doesn't scratch the surface about explaining everything about what we did, but I wanted to make sure that you get this context. So for you to fully understand your role, I wanted to explain 2 key terms. First is a strategic platform. So that's the term we use to describe the focus of a department or an initiative and even a committee to some extent. Strategic platforms, I'm referring to the picture in the bottom right corner of this slide. I know it's hard to read right now, but I'll explain the components in a moment. Really, we're talking about not creating something from scratch, but really just a conglomeration of a lot of good strategic planning work that we've already done in sort of a one pager where you can see that vision. For those of you that have been here for a while, who remembers the results maps, like the one in the upper left-hand corner here? Okay, good. And so if that doesn't ring a bell, then think back to the last committee report you read. On that report, there's a space for us to identify which strategic result that item achieves. Every committee report has that. And so the term strategic result, that references those maps in the top left corner. We built those during the priority-based budgeting process. There are 5 of those results maps. Significant time was spent wordsmithing them. When we went through that process, generally speaking, most governments fall into similar categories as us, right? We have 5 of these. There's generally a good government one, there's a public safety one, there's one for infrastructure, there's one for constituent well-being, and there's generally one for economic growth and vitality. Where we put our own spin on it was in those bubbles around the outside. That was how we defined what that overall strategic result means to us. And so again, we took all that good work that was already done. We knew we also had an existing mission, vision, and values. And so we put all that stuff together into one strategic platform. So one of these bottom right documents for each of the 5 areas. Each committee of the board sort of aligns with then each of these 5 areas. This is by design. I will provide the strategic platforms for each of your respective committees each time we do an EOS presentation for each of the first 3 quarters. So for each of the quarters, rather. So I will show the strategic platforms, but don't mind if I sort of breeze through these because, again, I will share these out. So the good government strategic platform, departments that report to the executive committee fall under the good government strategic platform. Departments that fall under the public safety committee also fall under the safe and secure community strategic platform. Departments that report to the public works committee fall under the reliable infrastructure strategic platform. Departments that report to human services committee fall under the constituent well-being strategic platform. And finally, departments that report to land use and planning fall under the economic vitality strategic platform. So again, I'll share these out and you'll have those. But again, it's all built on stuff we've already done, all built on stuff you've probably already seen before. So nothing earth-shattering here, but I did want to use this as an opportunity to set the table. And so each of these individual strategic platforms, picture the same way the committees roll up into the full county board. Each of these strategic platforms sort of can roll up then into a strategic platform for the full county, right? So each of these 5 pillars becomes each of those individual strategic platforms: good government, safe and secure, reliable infrastructure, constituent well-being, and economic vitality as we go across from left to right. This document or this picture also just kind of shows that concept, right? The top one is the countywide platform. The rest of them just sort of feed up into that. The next term you need to be familiar with is initiatives. So for our purposes, again, an initiative is when a department is investigating or implementing new items and significant changes or improvements to existing items. We said before that we're not necessarily focusing on status quo or operational stuff. So again, new or significant changes. For the most part, departments, they're already working on large projects. It's not like we sat down and had them think of stuff to do. We're really just taking what they're already doing and structuring it in a sort of a standardized way that we can report. You know, by sort of breaking it down into the bite-sized chunks, it also helps us cascade goals throughout the organization, right? So one person's global initiative becomes a bunch of different tasks that they need to then potentially assign out to folks. And so all that becomes goals from top all the way down. So you can cascade those goals throughout. And then finally, the timeline for these initiatives, we're talking about the biennium, right? So 2022 through 2023. We want to align that with our budget, just so that our initiatives and our budget are in alignment. And that sort of sets the table for some additional things that we'll talk about in a moment. So when we talk about the components of initiative, we're really talking about 3 levels. The initiative itself is sort of that high level project or strategy statement. You know, we're really talking about a destination or an outcome at that point. The next piece is a goal, right? So a goal is kind of a subset of an initiative. So that talks about the achievements or the stops that along the path. It talks about, basically that's the what, not the how necessarily. We're not there yet. And then there's an additional piece which is called targets. Targets are a subset of a goal. Targets describe sort of the tasks, the work items required to accomplish a goal. Initiatives and goals are going to be presented to the committee. Targets, they might be discussed when they provide context, but at the target level, we're really starting to get into a level of detail that's operational. It's largely beyond the scope of what committees do or should do even. And so we won't focus on the targets themselves, but they may be described to provide sort of that context for you. Targets are really at the department level at that point. So that's the concept. I hope I didn't bore you too much, but now I wanted to sort of shift into what the committee's role is going to be specifically. So starting next week, you're going to start seeing discussion items called quarterly reports for select departments. We didn't use the term EOS at first because we didn't want to confuse anybody. We haven't given this presentation yet. We haven't formally rolled anything out. We eventually plan to start using the term EOS in those agendas. But that's what you'll see at this point. They're called quarterly reports. So next month, mine is called BPA quarterly report at executive committee. The departments are going to present, again, on a quarterly basis to their respective committees. We've staggered those departments, so not everybody presents all at once. You're going to see each department sort of across that quarter, and then they'll just continue to follow that cycle every 3 months. Probably going to be hard to see this, but really this just kind of lays out with that reporting structure and that order. So it's got the committees along the left, and it's got the months and the departments along across from left to right. I really just wanted, so I'll definitely be providing that order to you in a future committee packet. But I also wanted to show this just so that you can see sort of some of the departments that have been working through these efforts. I also wanted to point out, that you'll notice some departments are large enough where they chose to break up their reporting by division instead of by the full department. HSD is an example here, where they had enough initiatives that it made sense to break them up. Others chose to keep them combined. There's no perfect way. If there's a particular department that's not on here at this point, it's either because a decision was made to hold off on implementing EOS or something came up that prevented them from participating. We've got at least one more round of sessions planned. So we're going to be adding additional groups to this mix. But here's what you'll start to see beginning this month. So again, each respective month, you'll see a discussion item on the agenda. In your packet, you'll get a set of reports for each group that's on here. Those reports are going to contain 1 page per initiative. So this is an example of what you're going to see. As you can see, lots of data components on here. You'll have some context. You'll be able to determine what the status is of an initiative. You'll be able to see the next steps. So these reports are designed to help inform you about what's happening in departments, but then potentially to inform you about possible issues coming up that are going to require either your committee to, give consent, to approve something, potentially the full board to approve something. We're going to try and piece in what your involvement is going to be within each of these initiatives. There's information on, again, the overall initiative at the top. And then as you go down, you'll see there's information on the overall, on the goals themselves. There are colors in here. There's a lot of different colors on this example, but really they're just designed to give you a visual cue of the status of a particular goal, right? So green is good, red is bad, kind of a thing. This tool was developed in-house. So again, while I'm giving out thank yous, big thanks to IT. Dave Zarder in IT, he always does a great job. He's fantastic at taking what's in a person's brain and making it a computer program. And so thanks to Dave. This is where we're at now. This is what we'll start with. Please provide feedback. This was developed in-house, so we can make tweaks to it. Please provide feedback if you have any. As you start looking at these at committee, we're certainly open and looking at making improvements to this. Just to sort of touch on one possible improvement, we're looking at sort of developing like a cover page concept. So as I mentioned, there's one of these pages for each initiative in that particular department. We're looking at sort of building out a cover page that kind of gives you a 1-page status update with some of the more traditional dashboard type, like a gauge cluster type view. And so that's one potential improvement we're looking at already. But again, please provide feedback if you have any. So now that you've seen what you'll be getting and who you'll be getting it from and when, I wanted to spend a little bit more time talking about what the respective roles are. So I mentioned before, but I'll say it again, these reports are informational only. So they're designed to inform you of what's happening. It's not to seek approval or direction at this time. So again, traditionally stuff like this would even be put on a consent agenda item. We're not looking to do that right now. We're putting these as discussion items because we want to make sure we present them to you. But I just wanted to point that out, that in your role in the reporting process, it's simply just to be reported to, right? There's a really good chance that a component of what's being described in these initiatives, there's a really good chance that requires an action or a consent of a committee, and again, even the full board potentially, right? So an example of that would be if one of the goals or one of the goals of an initiative is to get approval on a policy change or a code change or a grant application or something like that. As we're presenting these initiatives, we're going to try and point out those pieces in the process so you can see how you sort of fit into that overall initiative and that action plan. Next, these are designed to be brief, so 10 minutes or less. EOS and Traction, they each value brief, concise updates to inform leadership about what they need to know, keep them out of the weeds. So informing and educating in this case are not the same things, right? So informing means to keep you up to date on our efforts towards this initiative. educating about how a particular program works, not necessarily a goal of EOS. So if you want sort of a presentation in more detail about like what this whole like program does, please request that and we'll certainly make sure that we give you that presentation. But we didn't want to necessarily bog these EOS reports down by giving a 10-minute presentation on every department that we, or every program that we do. Don't get lost in the future. So a lot of these initiatives describe project steps further out than the one that's right in front of our face. Right? So if there's an approval process for a grant, that's one goal. But then the next goal might describe the implementation process for a new program that was funded by that grant. I think, you know, I bring this up because I think you should know that there's a point in this process where our goals can and will change depending on the results of another goal potentially, right? So if something does or does not get approved at one level, that could impact another goal. And so I bring that up because as you're reviewing that initiative in totality, some of the goals you see that are parked out far in the future, you know, there might be times when a department says or responds to a question, you know, we're not there yet. And I wanted to bring that up to make sure that you understand that's acceptable at this point. And then finally, the dates that are used in your report are very specific down to the day. Generally speaking, you know, if you're setting goals 2 years out, you're not generally able to get it down to a day. So when you see a day on there, just understand that that's a date in a window of time in most cases. So again, just wanted to point that out. And then finally, you know, I wanted to point out that committees aren't going to be the hammer in all of this, right? So accountability in its purest form, that comes in the performance reviews of the people involved in doing these initiatives, right? So their individual performance goals contribute towards the achievement of that overall initiative. So the formal accountability piece will be taken care of through the performance review process. But I do want to point out that there's an informal accountability in all this too, right? So there's a saying, what gets reported gets done, or what gets measured gets done. And so simply by saying these things out loud in a public setting can really help drive accountability. So that's a summary of your role in the reporting process. You know, please keep these things in mind next week and in the coming presentations. I'll continue to remind everyone of our respective roles in the process. But again, I did want to point that out. So last slide, just wanted to include a slide to describe the fact that we're not done. You know, we've done a lot of good work implementing, but there's always a continuous improvement process with anything. And so, you know, I mentioned earlier, Traction has a lot of concepts. And so we're going to continue to evaluate all of the other stuff that's in here for potential use at the county. You know, I mentioned before, one thing we're looking at doing sooner than later is fine tuning the reporting that you see at committee. So again, the cover page concept I mentioned. Another thing we're looking at is building some financial or budget kind of status reports into these reports as well. And so more to come soon on that. That stuff's in development right now. But so yeah, our efforts are not complete, but it feels good to have the first round out of the way. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions. Sorry, I took more time than I had to. I tried to run through it.
Mr. Schulteis, you had a question?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. So just a question of clarification. I know you provide a lot of information related to the quarterly report and the dashboards. So the nice internal product that you put up demonstrated kind of the red, yellow, green stop and go lights. look like a dashboard. Is that part of the quarterly report, or is the quarterly report in a dashboard format?
Sure. So this is essentially the quarterly report.
Excellent.
And you will see one of these pages for each initiative of that department. And so that's where we're trying to do that cover page concept as an enhancement so that it clearly defines and kind of, encapsulates what's happening at that one group level. So you can see it all together, and that will provide more of a dashboard concept with gauges and things like that.
Great, thank you. Love dashboards.
Good. Do.
Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, does everybody understand the full concept of what we've all heard here? Like, you could explain it? If you had to get up in front of a high school class right now and explain everything that he just said, I don't mean to put anybody on the spot, but he went over like a lot of stuff, and sometimes we get this stuff and we don't quite get what we're driving at. Luckily, I speak fluent, nerd. So, yeah, basically, and correct me if I'm wrong, we're going to take everything that's coming from all the departments. We're going to kind of unify it, make sure that it's all kind of consistent and the same, and put it into the pipeline and make this pipeline transparent so that you can see it and you can see what's coming up the line. So stuff that might be only in the concept phase, as it comes to maturation, you'll understand it because you've seen it for months now. Would that be a pretty good synopsis of what we're talking about?
I think so. From a committee perspective, the reports you're getting, that's a good.
Okay, so I just want to make sure everybody's clear on that, because sometimes things can be a word salad and a lot of, really big, heady concepts, and not all of us are in business and stuff like that. So hopefully that helps you to understand it. But if you don't, really take the time and go to Aaron, get a little bit better explanation. You should be able to explain this concept if you had to. Because you need to understand how this is going to work in order for it to work in a responsible way. Because the idea here is that when they bring you these concepts, that you can make good decisions, help to make good policy, reduce the amount of questions, make it a lot more efficient. This is something that we've been working for a long time. So do try to get a really good working knowledge of what he's talking about here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
Thank you for bringing that up. One concept we talked about as we were building this out is the reporting to the committees and ultimately the board. That's designed to help you get to yes faster, right? To help get that mutual understanding, to help them understand the role in the process to get to yes faster.
Supervisor Gallows.
I think you just answered my question is, your problem statement going into this, what is the end game? And it's to make more informed decisions and to accomplish things quicker and faster and also be able to report on and track it. Do you guys, in addition to your Racy matrix, is that also incorporating objectives and key results? I mean, is that what you're using that matrix for?
The matrix was designed to start off with, we set a baseline for just functions through it was designed to change the way of thinking from org chart to functions and roles. And so the next, that was an exercise to really change the way of thinking. The next logical step would be to do that, yes.
Well, you're talking about agile, different ways of working, better way of working, efficiencies, et cetera. Maybe even Kanbaning and such with your project and your dashboards. But do you guys have then success criteria that you're going to measure, year one in, year two in?
Well, at this point, the initiatives are described as, once we get to the goal level and below, we're describing those with the SMART, right? So specific, measurable, achievable, what is it?
Trouble and time.
Time, yes, sorry. And so from that perspective, yes. But the next step, another next step we're doing is to talk about some of that operational components and how to fold that in, and that's where we get into more of what you're talking about.
Thank you.
Supervisor Conrad.
Thank you. This is what I live now as a nurse. I've created dashboards and things too. I'm in the office. I work in quality now. So I'm kind of looking bigger picture then too, or whatever, kind of how to apply this. So say the chair of Public Safety Committee is going to come, to us here and give a quarterly update utilizing this format that you have up on the screen. And there'll be goals, there'll be objectives, we'll have benchmarks so we can do the red, yellow, green and.
So generally these presentations are at the committee level. That's the current design. And so it would be a department representative presenting that to the committee. The chair is certainly, welcome to provide those updates to the full board after that. But at this point, the plan wasn't for.
Okay, yeah, because I'm curious, because our consent agenda, we have committee chair and department updates, and those are all, there's no standardization to them, and they're inconsistent, so I was wondering if maybe that was kind of the bigger picture, next step potentially. Are you looking at something else to bring forth for that aspect?
We can certainly consider how those individual reports from at the committee level fold into this consent agenda. We haven't at this point, but we can. So I appreciate the feedback.
Yes, sir. Supervisor Krebs.
Who's been tasked with creating the goals and creating the tasks that these reports will contain?
At the department level, so department heads and other leadership within the departments.
Will they take input from committee if there's, based off of committee feedback, what goal, if there's additional goals or different types of tasks that may have been missed or should be explored more? Or I guess what's the flow of communication here? Is this a one way we're just taking and we're reading it, or where does the committee give the feedback?
It's designed to be more of a communication out, like here's the vision, communicating out, and here's where we see your role in the process. It's certainly be.
I'm just trying to figure out if a committee disagrees with a goal, how do we have that discussion?
I don't think you're gonna see that. You're more than likely gonna see suggestions for new goals that are kicked up to departments and back up the chain, and it's really gonna be circular, I think. I think what you're gonna find is that a lot of the initiatives that we started with came from my policy agenda, which largely was formulated from previous boards. And I think for the most part, it's gonna be continual feedback that's feeding that information. May not be directly from a suggestion from a committee member, but it might come from a conversation at a committee table, or maybe even a community listening session or something like that. So I let's just see how it works. But I kind of doubt we're gonna run into disagreement by committee and.
Oh, that was my follow-up point is I think I can't speak for other committees, but for my own sake, at my first receiving a report at our first committee meeting, I think it'll be helpful if we take extra time to kind of walk through how to digest it or what, you can show me this up on a screen, but until I'm holding one in my hand, I haven't read the book. It's nothing to me at this point at all.
Absolutely, and so I plan to be at every committee meeting to help.
If we talk about structure, do that first one and really try to explain what the purpose of however it's presented and laid out is, and
the components of the report, absolutely. Yeah.
Supervisor Gallantz.
Well, you didn't necessarily say this, Supervisor Krebs, but I think maybe hidden in there was a comment that Mr. Dahl mentioned earlier is the risk is looking at this and saying, oh, I have an opinion on this. Well, you do, but you also don't, you know, we're a policy and an advisory committee, you know, and if something in red, we shouldn't be go badgering why it's in red unless it's a policy issue potentially. So there's a risk of having too much information.
Yeah, we struggle with that balance, but this is where we landed.
Any other questions or comments? Hearing none, thank you.
All right, thank you.
With that, we'll move on to the resolutions and commendations. The first is a commendation of May Opperman. And personally, a special congratulations to Ms. Opperman for 46 years with the county. And I would guess she's been working at the county since or before many of you were in grade school. It's a long time, isn't that right, Mr. Supervisor Simisic?
I wouldn't know.
With that, the clerk will read the commendation.
We gotta take a
Oh, I'm sorry, we need is there a motion and a second to present this commendation?
move.
Supervisor Bossert and Supervisor Simisic. It's all yours, man.
Whereas May Opperman has contributed 46 years of loyal service to the citizens of Washington County, and whereas May Opperman has chosen to retire from her present position of Administrative Assistant 1 at the Samaritan Health Center, now therefore be it resolved that the Washington County Board of Supervisors pause in its deliberations to pay tribute and to commend May Opperman for her 46 years of meritorious service. Be it further resolved that on behalf of all citizens of Washington County, this body does herewith extend to her heartfelt thanks for her many accomplishments and successes. Be it further resolved that a copy of this resolution be forwarded to May Opperman as a token of appreciation on the part of this board.
Need help up there, Carol?
Yes, thank you.
Good one, Mr. Smising.
Yes. All right, moving on to item number B, 2022 Resolution 21, grant application for Wisconsin youth. This is designed to help prevent substance abuse with our kids. Now, we're going to assume that you've all read through the information provided, so I'll entertain a motion in a second to approve Resolution 21, accepting a youth presentation grant from the state. Mr. Simisic and Mr. Shadman. Any questions or other discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you, so passed. Item number C, Resolution 22, transfer from the general fund for next generation housing development to replace allocated ARPA funds. This authorizes the transfer of $7.5 million of the general fund to the next generation housing fund for pilot developments and startup tasks for future next gen housing development. This was approved by consensus at the executive committee at the May 18 meeting. It should be noted that the initial general fund transfer will be essentially recouped during the 2022 year-end close and will not impact the county's current financial standing. Is there a motion and second to proceed with this transfer? Mr. Bossert, Ms. Schulteis? Yes, sir.
Would you like me to present on it,
Discussion.
Mr. Chairman?
All yours.
Okay, sounds great. So I tried to make this as concise as possible in this committee report, and I'm not sure whether or not I did that. You heard the report from the finance director a few minutes ago. I think Marty did a good job of explaining how the dollars are being allocated and working. To put this as succinctly as possible, we're trying to cut federal red tape and make it as easy as we possibly can with the municipal partners that we have who are working with us in the Next Generation Housing Coalition. There are 3 communities that are now in the pilot program process. The Village of Jackson, the Village of Slinger, and the City of Hartford. They are the first 3 in the pilot program. As I've communicated to you and to the executive committee several times, and I've had the same conversation in public meetings, our hope is that the pilot programs are successful pilots and that we're able to replicate it for other villages and cities across the county. The coalition's work has indicated that. They have a full inventory of the properties all across the county and those municipalities that they hope to eventually take from pilot status into active status. Each one of the 3 municipalities that we're talking about, I have qualified through that process, have been approved from the Next Generation Coalition Committee to have a $2.4 million allocation. What you're approving today is the general fund transfer that will allow for that to happen without the federal strings attached. As the committee chairman, as the chairman just indicated, by you going through this process, we will use general fund money on the front end. And by virtue of how the finance director just discussed the dollars flowing through the budget, as was described in the committee report, we essentially defederalize them and cut that red tape, still at the end of the process, making ourselves whole. So I hope that gives you enough of an understanding of what it is that we're trying to do with this procedure of doing a general fund transfer. It's certainly part of the larger Our Great Community Initiative, which we've been in continual communication with the executive committee for. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Mr. Kelly, please.
Mr. Showman, County Executive Showman, excuse me. It says we would kind of be violating a bit of a policy for a short period of time. Is that our policy or federal policy?
Where are you reading from?
It was just in how the fiscal effect says that it will temporarily impact our compliance with the fund balance policies.
So those are internal policies.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that we weren't going to be in, non-compliance with federal or anything like that. Obviously, we shouldn't be, but the way that worded, I just wanted to be sure.
No, good question. It's our own policies. All the money's literally sitting in the bank. It's a matter of which order is it pulled from where. So it's technically on the books. Our fund balance will be drawn down. But as the money works its way through the 2022 budget and there's budget surpluses at the end, it's replacing. I hope that answers your question.
No, it did.
I know it's a
Absolutely.
little complicated.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that was well understood.
Sure. It's a good point.
Supervisor Visbala.
That was my exact question, so I had that highlighted and marked, and it was just something that stood out like a sore thumb, and you clarified it, so.
Supervisor Krebs.
So I want to continue on what you just said. The funds will be replenished towards the end of this budget cycle with surpluses. What if those surpluses aren't there?
They are already there.
But what if other expenses come up and
We would have to come back to it again. Because all of the money already is in the coffers, so to speak. So property taxes, literally by the end of the month, are all collected. The dollars that have come through from Arpa have already come in. We're sitting on the dollars. It's just a matter of how they work their way out the door. And quite frankly, it's an accounting procedure that we're going through. So there isn't a risk of that. The risk in that regard would be if we get some unexpected expenses, we'd have to come for another general fund transfer.
Okay. So at the start of the next budget cycle, our general fund will be replenished back up to what that 7.5 million that we're pulling out of it at this point.
At the end of this calendar year, that will happen.
And it's the full 7.5 million. It's not enough just to bring it up to the minimum, our minimum fund policy level, however it was worded in there.
Right. It'll go right back to where it was. Basically, we're pulling 7.5 million out of the general fund balance right now. It'll be replenished at basically the end of the calendar year, and we're right back to where we were in essence.
Okay. Second question I have is so on the landscape shape spreadsheet that we received today, it has that 7.5 million shown on there as ARPA money, correct?
Yes.
So once we fund the next generation housing with the general fund money, does the original 7.5 million that's on this spreadsheet go back into the unallocated amounts? Am I understanding this right?
So on this spreadsheet, you'll notice that line says public safety NGH swap.
Yep.
So basically what it's indicating is those funds are allocated to next gen housing. We're not gonna spend ARPA funds on next gen housing for several reasons. One big reason, I just wanna point out too, we have to do a single audit on these funds, which is an additional audit. We already do that. A lot of our municipalities do not. So by us giving them ARPA dollars, that adds additional burden to them for a single audit and additional cost, which we would not be able to cover for them. So that's one of the reasons that we're doing this swap, kind of a shift. So basically what's gonna happen is that 7.5 million is gonna go against our public safety expenses this year instead of using levy dollars. And then those levy dollars won't be used, so that will go back to replenish the general fund, but the ARPA dollars will be spent.
So that's why it's under publics. I didn't understand why public safety was associated with next generation housing.
It's just kind of a way to indicate that we had originally allocated it to next gen housing, but we're kind of shifting which bucket the funds are coming from to ease some of the burdens of using ARPA dollars. And we can use our general fund dollars for next gen housing without causing all those burdens on ourselves for the reporting and on our municipality partners.
I understand the ease of reporting, and I agree that's a better way to go. I guess the other question is since it's in 2022 public safety, what do we, obviously that's expenses or those items that's going towards have been identified and it's probably in the works of being used.
It's most likely going to be used for salaries, benefits, staffing in our corrections and dispatch areas.
So this is ongoing expenses versus
Yes.
one-time items, expenses or improvements types.
Yeah. So it's a one-time shuffle of a one-time fund to an ongoing cost.
Operating versus one.
So that's perplexes me, and in the future, well, how we're going to pay for those ongoing costs on that one time.
They're already in our budget.
The ongoing money got shifted to next generation housing. It'll drop back into public safety in the subsequent year.
I look forward to looking at the next budget.
You gotta do
It's
a
all
dance in your
bookkeeping.
head.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's all book. Yep.
Yes, Supervisor Krieger Gundrum.
So specifically, how does this $7.5 million get spent?
So it's on a case-by-case basis with the municipality. So the answer is it depends, but each one of those localities has identified not only a specific property that they're interested in, but a specific type of development that they're interested in. They're all a little bit unique. So to give you just some for instances, in Jackson, there's a property directly behind the new Village Hall. There's a number of pieces around that are associated, some associated with the TIF district, others associated with the Village Hall project, but there's 20 acres that's specifically cited for this piece of next generation housing explicitly. In Slinger, there's you're probably familiar with this, but maybe the rest of you aren't. There's a property on the southwest corner of the interchange of 41 and 60. That's a large proposed development that includes some residential, but a lot of commercial and potentially industrial. It would be specific to the housing component. So in the Jackson example, we're talking about going the village and county collectively acting essentially as developer, going out for an RFP for a developer to do the work, and then going out for separate RFP potentially for individual builders to purchase each individual lot. In Slinger, it's likely to look different. It might be more of a direct design build type of an RFP where the dollars are going into the totality. What we're working on right now, and Hartford's a whole nother animal because in Hartford, they also have a select site. They also have a combination of industrial or commercial and housing, but that property is owned by HADC. So at the end, what we've got working right now is we're working with Vanderwall and Associates on formulating how do we make sure that each individual lot, when it is sold, there is no equity theft. And what I mean by that is we don't want to create a situation where we're basically giving away land or the cost of the infrastructure that went to the land, and then the homeowner is simply buying the structure and getting basically the land and infrastructure for free. Because what happens is you have, let's say in the subdivision in Jackson, you have a home that's worth $250,000, but the land and infrastructure that's worth another $100,000. And the subdivision across the street, that whole thing costs $350,000. I don't want someone buying the $250,000 house on day one, turning around a month later and taking the extra $100,000 and pocketing it. So we're trying to figure out what instruments can we put in place similar to the forgivable loan program, where there has to be some kind of earning back of that equity. So in other words, the short way of saying that is we don't want to do subsidized housing. So how do we set it up where they have to earn the equity back? They have to stay X amount of years. It's maybe built into some kind of special assessment. They're working through that component of it right now in every single scenario. We don't want to have it set up where we have a giveaway to a developer or we have a giveaway to a new homeowner. Instead, it's intended to be an incentive to get them to come, to stay long enough, hopefully that they have kids and they put them in school and now they're here. And then they're giving back to the community at the same time.
So you're physically not using the money to buy property?
We could be using it to buy property and then taking, for example, the land and having a secondary mortgage. That would be one potential, or a community land trust, which is some version of the same type of thing. So we bought the land, now we're selling it back to you through a mortgage, which is forgivable to avoid the equity theft.
So all of the loans then are forgivable loans?
That is one design concept. I don't want to put words in the mouth of Vanderwall. I want them to be able to design something that is workable. But the goal is it will not allow for equity theft. We made it very, very clear to them what the design ends up looking like, whether it's a special assessment, a community land trust, or some concept like the forgivable loan program. We want to make sure that the new property owner can't just walk away and pocket $100,000 or $50,000 or whatever the number is.
Not sure you can actually enforce that, or how would you enforce that?
So there's a number of ways. Through a special assessment, you absolutely can enforce it. It probably just takes longer. Through a community land trust, you can enforce it. But you run into an issue similar to what you run in a mobile home park, where you own the house, but you don't own the land under it. The community land trust does. Through the forgivable loan program, you can enforce it because you're a secondary mortgage, secondary to the primary mortgage. So when the sale of the land happens, you have a lien on the property if they don't pay you. So the question becomes, what's the right mechanism to make it workable? Number one, legal, number two, and enforceable, number three. And so we're hoping that Vanderwall will come back with the proper legal instruments to be able to implement it in all three communities.
And is the $7.5 million used to pay Vanderwall, part of it?
No, separate funding that we have approved through the budget for the community development department is paying Vanderwall as a planning consultant.
And then there's another line in here called $2.5 million Next Generation Loan Program.
Yes.
How is that related?
So the Next Generation Loan Program, forgivable loan program, was approved was reported at the executive committee. Those dollars are immediately deployable, and by immediately I mean I hope we're ready to roll that out by September, October. But that program is designed to be secondary to any mortgage, the majority of which should be new homes, $400,000 and under. But The design is to incentivize existing home builds that are close to the affordable range. There is no such thing, frankly, as homes that are being built in what we determine for next generation housing that essentially right now is below 300,000. Builders tell us they literally can't build them. So the goal is to be able to provide enough of an incentive to get young people to come through a forgivable loan program. They're designed also to be stackable, meaning if the bank has a down payment program and for example, the home consortium has a additional down payment program that can go together, this could be stacked with it. So instead of a $25,000 program, which is what the forgivable loan program is, up to $25,000. They could have the 25 plus the other two, so maybe it's more like 40 or 50,000. So it's designed, EDWC would be the administrator of the program. The dollars would be coming from the county, allocated to EDWC in tranches, and then on a loan by loan basis, they would be administered, similar to, for example, how the small business program works.
So why are we approving this tonight before the consultant has put together how it's going to work?
So each one of the municipalities will be different. So it's very possible that exactly what Van de Waal designs, which is predominantly being driven by the work that's happening in the Village of Jackson, it's modified when we finally get to Slinger and then later get to Hartford or vice versa. So in order to be nimble, we want to be able to have the general fund transfer happen now, so that those dollars are able to be allocated immediately. Now, we certainly will be reporting back to Executive Committee and to the Next Generation Housing Coalition, which if you weren't watching this, the Next Generation Housing Coalition has to go to the Executive Committee for any approvals. I think it's over $10,000, so they can't expend any money. Same rules apply to the Brownfield program. So the answer is to keep these projects moving. We believe if we can stay on track right now with the Village of Jackson, who's the fastest moving project, we will be able to hand keys to people for new homes by the end of next year. We may be able to move dirt by the first thaw of next year. So this helps us keep that ball moving forward.
Supervisor Conrad.
Oh, I'm sorry, I just had one more
Oh, I'm
question.
sorry.
So it's not ever going to come back to the board. Once we approve the transfer of 7.5 million, it's only up to the New Generation Housing requesting from executive.
Correct. So basically what you'll do is this will create an account that can be used for Next Generation Housing. It's the responsibility of the Next Generation Housing Committee reporting through Executive Committee to make sure all the dollars are actually authorized to go out the door.
Just one more. How does the builder and developer, what happens with them? Does the builder developer, what is it that they get out of this? And why would they, what is the incentive for them?
Well, their profit margins on their individual components. So in the Village of Jackson, for example, because the village and the county right now in that model are acting as the developer, we're literally RFPing kind of like a public works type of a project, not exactly, but similar. So there'll be a percentage that they're earning on the work that they're doing. The builder individually will be profiting on whatever the profit margin is on building and selling that house. This was one of the things that became very, very apparent as we've worked our way through the Next Generation Housing Initiative. Post 2008, there are very few developers and builders who are in combination left. What that's done is it's created a situation where small home builders, and I don't mean they build small homes, I mean builders that are small, they have very, very few opportunities to build new unless somebody goes out and buys a 5-acre lot, for example. So instead, what you're seeing is these mega developers who are buying and building, and their profit margins are multiple layers throughout. which is one of the components adding to the cost of a home. Frankly, the biggest component to the cost of a home is the regulations that municipalities and counties put on them. So a $400,000 home, you're talking $60,000 to $80,000 in regulatory costs. We're hoping that by the village and the county working together, we can undercut much of that, and we can undercut some of the costs that a large developer is putting into all of the little components. You think of it's everything. It's the sale of the home, it's the construction of the home, it's the price of the land, it's the premium on the infrastructure. Everywhere there's a premium added. So we're trying to hit as many as we can in each individual development, and we're trying slightly different formulas in each community.
Can I make a statement?
Yes.
Okay. It sounds to me like we're subsidizing, which I don't think the Washington County taxpayers' funds should be used to subsidize builders and developers. I think that you've identified very specific areas, and so it's not going to go to a wide group of people. It's going to go to these selected developers and builders. And so I think it's really nothing more than a subsidy. And I don't think taxpayer money should be used to subsidize developers and builders. And if I'm wrong in that assumption, you can correct me, but I'm going to be voting no, because I don't think county taxpayers should be using their money to subsidize developers and builders. Yes, I'm done.
Supervisor Conrad, you got a question?
Yes, County Exec Shulman, you mentioned that builders, they're looking at more like $400,000 for homes. Really the next generation housing margins were supposed to be, those first time home buyers, those maybe lower, not really lower income, I mean, my goodness, but for, $250,000 to $300,000 housing. And that's really the footprint for next generation housing. This $400,000 mark, that's really goes beyond the philosophy of next generation housing. So that's a concern of mine, because wasn't that really our greatest need, was trying to get people into that $250,000 to $300,000 range. And so how are we going to meet that need and to try and keep that population of people here that can only afford those $250,000 to $300,000 range?
I'm not sure I understand your question, but I'll try to answer what I think you're asking. The pilots themselves are aimed at hitting $300,000 each.
Okay,
and they're not.
Said 400 that developers were.
Supervisor Krieger-Gundrum was asking separately about the down payment assistance program, which, if you remember the presentations that happened last October, one of the things that was brought up was simply creating enough inventory to churn existing home supply in the $250,000 to $300,000 range. Basically, people in that range, there aren't very few $350,000 to $400,000 homes. So folks in the $250,000 to $350,000 range have nowhere to move up. And so the down payment assistance program, that's why it was set at $400,000, to try to help create some of that churn. Basically, to boil it down to something simple, this is a supply side issue. That's what we have in Washington County. Supply side economics. There aren't enough homes. We have the exact opposite situation that we had in 2008. So we're trying our best to create a system that isn't subsidized housing. Instead, we're hoping to set it up so that we can prevent the equity theft that does happen with subsidization, which is called the TIF district, which happens in every single municipality in this county in an industry and commercial setting. I fought like hell to not have that. There are a number of these types of developments that are happening across Wisconsin, as close as Sheboygan, as far as Jefferson County, where they're literally just going to undercut the land cost and infrastructure costs and sell the home as is. It's going to create havoc on the market. which is exactly why we're trying to create the secondary mortgage component or community land trust type of component that prevents that from happening. Because if I was a developer, I mean, if I'm Kevin Zimmer on the northeast corner of 41 and 60, building $400,000, $500,000 homes, and I see a developer selling $300,000 homes, 100,000 of which was subsidized by the government, I'm furious. And any developer from the west side to the east side of the county and in between. So we're attempting to hit the $300,000 sweet spot while not giving a subsidy and preventing equity theft and acknowledging it's the value of that home at the end is probably going to be closer to $400,000. We want the price for Joe, whoever Joe is, to be close to $300,000 because the $20 an hour person, not the guy sitting on the dole, not the person who's been on unemployment for an unending amount of time or Social Security forever and ever, but the person who's a brand new teacher, a brand new cop, working on the line at Weld Fab or Quad Graphics or wherever else, that individual and their wife combined, if they both make around $40,000 a year, can't afford anything about 300 is probably the top end. So we're hoping we can hit that from their pocketbook's perspective. And 7 years from now, that thing's probably going to be worth $400,000 or $425,000. And by then, we hope we have them rooted and their kids in our school, and they're not going anywhere. So it is tricky business, but I'm trying to answer your question as best as I can. Hopefully I did.
Yeah, because really the focus of this next generation housing was that lower house value,
It is.
250 to 300.
Is, yes.
So but then how do we as a board know that these developments in Slinger and Jackson and Hartford are really going to, fit that vision? We're supposed to trust. I'm aware that the initial individual and the plan for the village of Slinger, that fell through.
The existing developer fell through. The project itself did not fall through. And the design that developer had, the reason it fell through was the precise reason why Supervisor Krieger-Gundrum objected to a subsidy. Because in order to make that work, it would have been a massive subsidy. They couldn't make the math work. And that's the problem. Now that model, same developer and other developers like that developer, that exact model is happening all over us. So we've got to figure out a way to make this work without subsidizing it as best we can, especially the housing side. But every day of the week and twice on Sunday, there's TIF districts approved in the state, in communities in this county. This month, there will be ones that are approved in this county that undercut and subsidize the cost of not just commercial and industrial, but also housing. We've been doing it for 50 years. Now, it's going to happen in residential areas. We're trying our best to hedge against it. And to answer your questions directly, yeah, I'm asking you to trust because we're trying to create something that doesn't exist. Nobody's doing this. There's nobody trying to figure out how do we do this without subsidizing. And in order to keep pace with the market, move fast. We can stick it through a bunch of bureaucracy and a bunch of committees and going through a lot of discussion and drag it out forever, and we'll get nowhere. But yeah, I am asking you to trust it. I'm asking you to work with the communities. And if it doesn't, this is why it's a pilot. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work, and we won't do it again.
$7.5 million pilot.
Yes, it's not cheap, no doubt.
Supervisor Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For those you don't know my background, I'm involved, my brother is a builder. Him and I built several homes. And starting with a few different observations. County Executive Showman is correct. One of the biggest cost drivers of housing is all the municipal compliance issues that you have. Lot sizes and permitting fees and, the list just goes on. And mega builders, my brother was one of those small builders that you talk about. That, yeah, he would stick literally all of his money into building a house. And at the end, hope to make some kind of profit off of it. But he had to purchase the land. just like everybody. He didn't make the kind of profit that some of these big development companies come up with. This cuts through a lot of that, which makes a house a lot more affordable. We're starting with that. Keep in mind that this board already approved the housing initiative in concept. Okay, we all understand that many of our companies are going without employees, and they're doing so, and our economic vitality is on the line because we are extremely short in housing. This is a huge problem. People don't want to commute all the way out here. You know, they don't have the means to, or it's just too difficult to do. I disagree with Supervisor Gundrum about this being a subsidy, because this is going to people who will have skin in the game. And that's the big difference here. I think that's the major difference here. You have to be working in this community. You have to be working within our system, raising your family. You have to be able to afford this house. This is not a giveaway by any means. This is an opportunity. And rather than just going to economic development, it actually gets to come to a working person. I like that idea. Now, I would be the first to say I will not go along with a subsidy. I wouldn't want it in my neighborhood. But an opportunity for somebody with skin in the game, yeah, I'll do that every day of the week. So I absolutely will be voting for this. I hope you'll join me in giving that opportunity to some people that we could use. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Supervisor Shotton.
Thank you. Just for clarification, my understanding is this is more of a loan program to the end user than it is a subsidy to a builder, right? In other words, we're getting involved with the purchaser of the house. We're buying the land, the builder builds, and then we own the land, but the end user is the one who has to somehow pay us back, or that's kind of.
That is one of the concepts. So let's just take a step back to 2007. In 2007, the way that these worked is the big banks would give humongous loans to developers that would cover all of these costs, land costs, infrastructure costs, regulatory costs, all of it was covered. The reason that a big part of the reason why the housing bubble crashed was because that didn't work. And all of the M&I Bank in Arizona, the reason they went belly up was because they subsidized all of this. Right now, there is nobody left. If you talk to the developers, big or small, they'll tell you most of the lots that have been built on since 2008 were lots that were developed before the Great Recession. Lots that those same banks gave loans to and then sold for pennies on the dollar later. So the expense hasn't gone away. Your municipalities haven't stopped charging those outrageous impact fees or haven't stopped making roads as wide as they are and haven't forced lot sizes to shrink down. The subdivision that Supervisor Kelling was just talking about that he lives in, you can't build that in West Bend anymore. As a matter of fact, none of you live in a municipality where you can build that house. You can't have lots that size. We've regulated it away. So the question is, how do we undercut all of those costs that we've put in place? And it's not just impact fees and permit fees. It's think about what happens when you require someone to, instead of having a 5,000 or 6,000 square foot lot, which is probably what Supervisor Kelling's house is on, to now we require them to have an 8,000 square foot lot. Well, do the math. You sell them an 80-acre farm and you turn it into a development, and every time you give up 2,000 square feet that person really doesn't actually need, the developer's not taking that cost. Oh, and then let's have a conversation about sidewalk on both sides, or B1211 curb, or roads that are extra wide with parking on both ends, or those fancy light poles on every single lot, or the fancy mailbox that you make them have. I mean, that's what we're talking about. So why is it as complicated as it is, and why am I asking you to trust? Because we got to cut through all that crap. We've got every plan commission in the county that we've got to try to work through and convince, let's just try this in one place and see if it can work. That's what we're trying to hedge against. There's the loan program, which is a smaller $2.5 million program. That's specifically for, as I mentioned, $400,000 and $25,000 each. That's really not part of this agenda. I'm surprised Mike isn't begging his maker, telling us to stop.
I was going to what you was talking about.
The other program, the 7.5 is 3 pilot programs. It's 2.4 million each. It could be land, it could help with infrastructure. It really just depends on each individual project. But the goal is to create a mechanism that's similar to that loan program where we're not giving equity away for nothing.
Right.
Just so everybody's aware of this, the way that the loan program works, the forgivable loan down payment program, as Supervisor Kelly was alluding to, it's not a giveaway. It's $25,000. In 7 years, you have to work 200 hours a year in a local nonprofit organization to earn your money back, essentially. You could also donate money to that organization, but you have to donate $38,000 in order to get your 25 back. The goal is to get them into the community and earn their keep, if you will. So it's no different. It's the exact inverse of the VA loan model. I got multiple VA loans. I went off and fought in a war. I served in the military. I came back and I was entitled to that benefit. Okay, this is the opposite of that. This generation isn't doing that. So it's you get the loan first, but you're going to earn it after. So is it going to work? I don't know, but we're not talking about using property tax money directly. We're talking about money that we advocated against from the federal government, that's here on a one-time basis. And we're hoping if this works, take the 3 pilot programs and assume in those 3 pilot programs, we build 300 homes total at the average of $300,000. Do the math on the equalized value. It's not a subsidy. You're gonna get your money back in spades. And if everything works perfectly, there'll be one finally someday where there's not a TIF involved. And then you'll get your money back immediately. So I'm very hopeful that this works. I'm not 100% convinced. I can't tell you for sure that it's gonna work, but what I'm seeing happen in other places, they're gonna subsidize. And I don't think we should.
Supervisor Gallows.
Yeah, coming back to the actual resolution and the money transfer.
Thank you.
Thank you. Because I'm still struggling with the language, even though I heard Margie speak of what we're doing and I believe she sort of phrased it as generally accepted accounting practices of moving money around. But it speaks to specifically that so this is line 32. Whereas in an effort to streamline mandatory APRA reporting, the 7.5 million identified for the next gen housing development has been allocated to another project. Not projects, not whatever specifics, but other projects. Is no longer available for the NGH project. I'm just concerned what that statement could mean or could be interpreted to mean. Meaning it says another project, presumably under APRA, and not paying ourselves back to generally accepted accounting practices. That's where my concern is. So if we're reporting to whomever from the federal government for this funds, how do we say with a straight face that this money is actually being used for next gen housing?
We don't. We tell them we're using it for public safety, because we are.
Right, and I'm uncomfortable with that. That seems like a little white lie to me.
It's an accounting practice. We're for sure using it for public safety.
It's allowable under Arpa.
The other concern that I have is, right now, this is funding from ARP, but could this be perceived as opening a door for additional funding from the county? And by agreeing to funding through the general fund, are we implicitly agreeing to future funding of the next gen housing through the general fund?
I mean, that's speculatory.
Speculatory, but it's right in my.
But I think that the question was asked before about what happens with the other $9 million. I made pretty clear, I think, from the beginning that I think we ought to wait and see if this works.
And that's a possibility. But don't get me wrong, I like the program, supportive of it. It will work through its cycle, but I'm concerned about transferring the fund as I just described. So it just, something doesn't seem right to me. And if we're being advised by staff, that's a generally accepted accounting process, that language just seems goofy that I just read.
I defer to Eileen.
I don't know, that's just an issue, fellow supervisors that I have.
Supervisor Graff.
It's been answered, but thanks.
All right. Supervisor Conrad.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just, yeah, I have a few concerns here yet. We can't really make an informed decision because we don't really know if there's going to be skin in the game. We don't know what banding bugles come up with yet. So I don't feel like I can really make an informed decision on this. We don't know the concepts. Thus, at this point, I would not vote in support of it.
Okay. Supervisor Schwab.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Comments were made earlier with regard to the cost of housing and the idea that the housing that's proposed isn't exactly the same price as was previously mentioned. I don't think it should surprise anyone that with the rise in the housing market of the last year, the end price of the product will be much higher than would have been anticipated at the inception of the plan. With regard to future expenditures, if the $7.5 million is approved this evening, any future expenditure would have to be approved by the board as well. So that really isn't a legitimate concern in my mind. I do believe that this is a good use of the funds for Washington County, for Washington County residents, for Washington County businesses, for a good use of ARPA funds that, as County Executive Shulman pointed out before, I don't think any of us really thought was a good idea from the federal government, but now that we have it, we have to use it in the best possible way. And if we can use that to build our communities, to enhance our Washington County workforce, to help our employers, that's a smart thing to do. And so I'm in favor of it. Thank you.
Call the question. Second.
All right.
Third.
All right. Question has been called. This will need a 2/3 majority vote. And so we'll go around the room with your voice vote. And we're going to start at the very end with Supervisor Hartwood. Come around this way, yay or nay? Supervisor Hartwood.
Yeah, I'm in favor of it.
Yay.
Yay.
Yay. No. No.
Yay.
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 Yay. Yay.
Yay.
Yay.
All right.
Ken.
Oh, I'm sorry. Ken.
Opposed?
Opposed?
Yes, sir.
All right.
Couldn't find a house in Gillespie.
17-3, resolution passes.
No, that was
17.
Sorry?
No,
never mind.
What did I do wrong?
no.
You're good. You're just never doing a meeting again.
All right, with that, we'll move on to ordinance 3, amending Article 3, Section 70-13 and 70-15 relating to county clerk and marriage license fees. The emphasis on this ordinance regarding marriage license is a minor one, correcting the language to reference our biennial budget. Of greater import is the section noting that the clerk of the county's chief clerk as the county's chief election officer and prohibiting the county clerk from accepting any grant or donation from any person or governmental entity for the purpose of election administration, including the collection of ballots or voter registrations. In other words, Mr. Zuckerberg's or any other persons or entities' financial involvement with elections in Washington County will not be allowed. Note that this was approved by the executive committee at the June 15th meeting. We need a motion and a second on this ordinance, please. Supervisor Schultes, Supervisor Hartwig. Any discussion or questions? Supervisor Krebs, can you answer this?
Sure, maybe. Depending on what it is.
Line 19,
Slide 19.
repeal of this section. Now, is that section A or
Yes,
section 1 or section
section
code
A.
7013? So repeal of only the blue words in the draft I'm looking at would require 2/3 vote to change.
Can't see what color they are, but section A, I believe that refers to the entire section A. The whole paragraph regarding accepting donations.
Okay, so if we, later on, we want to change other parts of 7013, that would be subject to just our general, whatever,
I believe so.
our code for what it takes to amend.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Supervisor Gallantson.
So to your comment, Chair Mary, it would be everybody. My question, have we had any constituents want to donate money?
In regards to elections?
Yeah.
No.
Okay.
We were offered the grant that ended up being the Zuckerberg grant. I believe every county in the state of Wisconsin and municipalities prior to the April 2020 election was offered that, and we declined. There's no need for funding outside of what we budget. Even in 2020, we did not need additional funding.
Got it. So our part to ensure that we adequately fund for labor, rental space, fill in the blank.
Yep, exactly.
And if some constituent for some reason felt compelled to donate their excess tax return, we'd say no.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Other questions? Hearing none, we'll have a vote on this. The majority vote is required. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None opposed. The ordinance is passed. Our next meeting date will be Wednesday, August 10th at 6 p.m.